They call it kindness, but when you look closely, it's not kindness at all. It's self-abandonment dressed up in a socially acceptable costume. And what's most disturbing is that it's not random, it's trained. From the moment you're old enough to walk and speak, if you're a girl, you're taught that your value lies in your ability to make others feel good. To please, to agree, to accommodate. You're rewarded for being quiet. You're applauded for being pleasant. You're accepted when you're compliant, and every time you put someone else's comfort above your truth, that programming digs a little deeper. So what happens? You learn to swallow your feelings. You apologize when you're not wrong. You let things slide because you don't want to seem difficult. But here's the truth most people won't tell you. When you make a habit of being nice, at the expense of your own boundaries, you're not being virtuous. You're being complicit in your own erosion. You're stepping out of alignment with who you really are, and the psychological cost of that, it's enormous. Because every time you override your inner voice to maintain external harmony, you train yourself to believe that your needs, your wants, your truth, they don't matter. And let's be very clear here, what you tolerate becomes your standard. Every it's okay when it's not okay. Every forced smile when you feel hurt. Every fake laugh to avoid conflict. These are not small things. They are deep betrayals of the self. They chip away at your identity, your confidence, your ability to trust your own intuition. You don't just lose your voice, you lose your sense of self. Psychologically speaking, this behavior is not altruism, it's survival. Niceness becomes a survival mechanism. You learn to be agreeable because it feels safer than being honest. You suppress discomfort because confrontation feels dangerous. You perform what people want to see, hoping they'll reward you with love, with belonging, with peace. But peace built on self-sacrifice is not peace, it's prison. And the irony is, the more nice you are, the more people take from you. Because you've shown them that you'll betray yourself to protect their comfort, and that's not strength, that's learned helplessness. This is where the philosophical element becomes unavoidable. Because if you believe your highest moral duty is to be nice, then you are fundamentally misaligned with the truth. Life is not about avoiding discomfort, it's about standing in the tension between truth and consequence. Being honest about what you feel, being clear about what you need, being willing to say, "This is who I am, even if it costs me your approval." That is integrity, that is self-respect, and without it, you live a fragmented life, outwardly pleasing, inwardly hollow. Let me ask you something that will likely sting. How many times have you sacrificed your well-being in the name of being easy to be around? How many times have you kept quiet to preserve a relationship that was already disrespecting you? How many times have you given second, third, 10th chances because you didn't want to be labeled as bitter, angry, or too much? At what point do you realize that the cost of being nice is your actual self? This isn't a call to become rude, cruel, or aggressive. This is a call to reclaim your authenticity, because kindness without boundaries is manipulation. It's a way to control how others see you. But truth with boundaries, that's power. That's where you stop being a mirror for other people's comfort and start becoming a reflection of your own strength. The real danger is that many women don't even recognize this behavior as harmful. It's been so normalized, so praised, so deeply embedded in their identity that they think suffering silently is noble. That putting others first is their purpose, that invisibility is a virtue. It's not, it's a cage, and the door is open. But walking out requires you to face something most people are terrified of, your own voice, your raw, honest, unfiltered voice. You were not made to be agreeable. You were made to be whole. And being whole means being willing to disappoint others in order to be loyal to yourself. It means being willing to face judgment, rejection, discomfort, all of it, in service of a life that is real. A life where your yes means yes, and your no means no. A life where you don't owe anyone your silence just because they can't handle your truth. So stop abandoning yourself in the name of politeness. Stop trading your authenticity for validation. Stop thinking that being agreeable makes you safe. It doesn't. It makes you disappear, because the longer you wear the mask of nice, the harder it is to remember what your real face looks like. There's a harsh reality that most women aren't taught until it's too late. The more available you are, the more invisible you become. And that's not a critique of your character. It's a principle of human behavior. What is always accessible, always present, always saying yes, becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar too quickly, too easily, too without effort, gets devalued. It's not because people are evil. It's because people are wired to assign worth based on effort, limitation, and scarcity. The simple truth is, what's rare commands attention. What's constant is taken for granted. This is where the nice girl mindset becomes dangerous. Because when you're always picking up the phone, always agreeing, always accommodating, always showing up no matter how you're treated, what you're unconsciously telling the world is this: I will tolerate anything as long as I am liked. You're offering yourself at a discount. You're placing yourself on emotional clearance. And the cost of that decision is respect. Now, I'm not talking about being distant or cold or emotionally unavailable. I'm talking about being selective, intentional. I'm talking about valuing your time, your space, your presence so deeply that it's not something people feel entitled to. It's something they have to earn. Because when you give everything freely, the assumption is that it must not be worth much. Think about that. If every person who mistreats you gets the same access to you as someone who shows up with honesty and respect, what are you teaching them? You're teaching them that there's no consequence for bad behavior. You're teaching them that your presence is guaranteed, no matter how little effort they put in. And that's not love, that's not connection, that's emotional servitude. Psychologically, people respond to boundaries the way they respond to fire, cautiously, with respect. They test them at first, sure, but when those boundaries hold, when they realize you're not someone who can be moved by guilt or manipulated by flattery, that's when the power dynamic shifts. That's when people start to ask themselves, what do I need to do to be worthy of this person's time? Instead of, what can I get away with? That single shift in perception is what separates the women who are respected from the women who are replaced. We live in a culture that glamorizes being the ride toward the girl who sticks around, who's loyal to a fault, who always understands, always forgives, always stays. But let's be honest, that girl rarely ends up with what she wants. She ends up tired, she ends up disappointed. She ends up wondering why she was never chosen the way she chose others, and the answer is brutal but true, because she gave everything up front. She offered her love, her attention, her energy, her emotional labor, all without requiring anything in return. She made herself an emotional convenience store. Open 24/7, no boundaries, no security, and no value attached. This is not about being manipulative. This is about being strategic with your worth. Philosophically, if you believe that your time and energy are sacred resources, then it becomes a moral responsibility to steward them wisely. You wouldn't pour your life savings into a business that shows no return. So why do you keep investing your soul into people who don't even show up with consistency? That's not generosity. That's self-destruction masked as love. You want to be respected. Withdraw from people who treat you like an option. You want to be taken seriously. Stop overextending for people who underdeliver. You want to be valued. Start valuing yourself so radically that people are forced to rise to your level or be removed from your space. Because every time you make yourself too available, you're reinforcing a lie, that you are not something to be earned. That lie is what keeps you in cycles of disrespect. That lie is what makes your love feel cheap. Human psychology is predictable. The harder something is to access, the more it's pursued. And when you finally understand that your energy is not owed, it's offered, you reclaim your position. You stop chasing and start choosing. You stop begging and start building. You stop wondering why people don't see your value and start realizing you've been placing it on the clearance rack from day one. So start pulling back, not to punish but to protect, not to manipulate but to recalibrate. Let people feel your absence. Let them wonder why they no longer have that easy access, because sometimes the most powerful message you can send is silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of a woman who knows her worth and no longer negotiates it. If you're always available, they'll never value your presence. Make your energy rare and watch how everything changes. There's something deeply sinister about the way society conditions women to be nice. It doesn't happen through force or violence. It happens through reward. You're rewarded for being easygoing. You're celebrated for being quiet. You're praised for being agreeable. You're labeled a good girl when you follow the rules, not because the rules are right, but because they make you easier to control. And this isn't accidental. It's a script, a silent one that's handed down through generations, embedded in education, media, even religion. It teaches you early that your safety, your belonging, your identity depend on your ability to conform. And conformity, let's be clear, doesn't mean harmony. It means self-erasure. It means cutting off your instincts to make others comfortable. It means filtering your anger, your grief, your intuition until you don't recognize your own voice anymore. You're not being taught to coexist. You're being trained to disappear, because the more compliant you are, the easier you are to manage, the easier you are to manipulate. And what makes it so dangerous is how normal it all looks. No one's holding a gun to your head telling you to smile. But try not smiling, and watch how quickly you're labeled as cold, arrogant, difficult. This is where psychology intersects with philosophy. Because what we're dealing with here isn't just individual behavior, it's collective moral conditioning. You've been taught that being small is noble, that being silent is respectful, that swallowing your truth is a virtue. But what if that's not virtue at all? What if it's a cage disguised as character? What if the real reason you're exhausted, anxious, and resentful isn't because you're doing too much, but because you've spent your entire life trying to fit into a mold that was never designed for your strength? This script tells you that your job is to be pleasing, that your worth depends on how little space you take up. But here's the truth. Strength without expression turns inward. And when a woman suppresses her true self for long enough, that suppression doesn't go away. It metastasizes. It becomes anxiety. It becomes shame. It becomes depression. You don't just lose your voice. You begin to believe that you never had one. And that's the most dangerous place to live. From the outside, you look calm, cooperative, composed. But on the inside, you're drowning in all the words you were never allowed to say. We see this especially in relationships. The nice girl is told that if she's patient, understanding, loyal, even in the face of mistreatment, eventually she'll be chosen. But this logic is flawed, because it's built on the assumption that love is earned through suffering, that being agreeable will somehow lead to security. But in reality, being overly agreeable is a signal to the wrong people. It tells manipulators that you're easy to guilt, that you'll tolerate emotional neglect, that you'll keep showing up even when the respect is gone. And if you're not careful, your desire to be loved will turn you into someone who will accept anything just to avoid being alone. There's a term in psychology called learned helplessness. It's when a person becomes so used to powerlessness that they stop trying to change their circumstances even when freedom is available. That's exactly what the nice girl script produces. You begin to believe that your role is to endure, to maintain peace at any cost, to hold it all together, even when it's breaking you. But endurance is not empowerment, and suffering is not a strategy. The philosophical question then becomes, who benefits when you stay silent? Who gains when you keep playing small? The answer is simple, everyone but you. The people who use your kindness, the systems that depend on your compliance, the culture that fears your full expression. Because a woman who speaks with clarity, who sets limits, who knows what she will and won't tolerate, she becomes unpredictable. She becomes inconvenient. She becomes a threat to the established order. And that's exactly why the nice girl script exists. To keep you predictable, agreeable, and out of your power. But here's the truth that no one tells you. You were not born to play a role. You were born to live a reality that is aligned with your full, complex, powerful self. And the only way to reclaim that reality is to break the script, to risk being disliked in order to be free, to say no when it's easier to say yes, to speak when it's more comfortable to stay quiet, to act not out of fear, but out of truth. You don't need to be liked by everyone. You need to be respected by yourself. And that only happens when you stop playing the part you were assigned and start becoming the person you were meant to be. There's a dangerous misconception floating around, especially among women who have been taught that being agreeable is the ultimate virtue, that setting boundaries is rude, that saying no is selfish, that protecting your peace makes you cold, difficult, or unkind. But let's strip away the emotional weight for a second and look at this logically. A boundary is not a wall, it's a definition. It says this is where I end and this is where you begin. Without that definition, relationships turn into emotional chaos. Without that line, you become a blank canvas for other people's projections, needs, and expectations. And when you live without boundaries, you're not just being nice. You're being passive in the face of your own erosion. You're allowing your energy to be siphoned by anyone who demands it, regardless of whether they've earned it. That's not generosity, that's psychological exposure. Because when people learn that you don't defend yourself, when they see that you'll stay silent to keep the peace, they stop respecting you. Not necessarily because they're cruel, but because human beings are wired to test limits. And when those limits don't exist, they push further. That's not malicious. That's behavioral psychology. We test to find where the edge is. And if you've trained people to believe you don't have one, don't be surprised when they walk all over you. Now here's where it gets even more serious. Every time you fail to set a boundary, you teach yourself that your needs aren't worth protecting, that your discomfort is more acceptable than someone else's disappointment, that silence is safer than self-respect. Over time, that self-abandonment calcifies, it turns into resentment, anxiety, depression. You don't just become exhausted, you become unrecognizable to yourself. Because if your entire identity is built around being easy to be around, what happens when you finally want to say no? What happens when you finally feel anger? You shut it down, you apologize for it, you feel guilt, but that guilt isn't a sign that you've done something wrong. That guilt is a withdrawal symptom from the addiction to approval, and let's be brutally honest, people will absolutely label your boundaries as rude if they were benefiting from your lack of them. That's not your problem, that's their exposure. That's their discomfort being confronted by the new version of you. The one who's no longer willing to overextend, overexplain, or oversacrifice just to be tolerated. When you start enforcing your limits, you'll lose some people, but the people you lose were never really there for you. They were there for what you provided, your compliance, your availability, your silence, and if those are the terms for being loved, then that's not love, it's consumption. Philosophically, boundaries represent the tension between freedom and responsibility. They say, I am responsible for me, and you are responsible for you. That's adulthood. That's maturity. And yet, many women are still operating from the mindset of a child, seeking permission, fearing punishment, craving validation from people who haven't earned the right to shape their decisions. When you stop asking for permission to exist fully, when you stop shrinking yourself to fit into relationships that suffocate your identity, you begin the painful but necessary process of individuation. You become whole, not perfect, not liked by everyone, but integrated, and that's the foundation of authentic power. The most effective boundary is the one that doesn't require an argument. It doesn't need an essay. It doesn't need to be justified. It simply exists. You say no, and you mean it. You walk away and you don't explain, not because you're cruel, but because your peace is non-negotiable. And when someone challenges that peace, you don't fold. You don't beg them to understand. You let their discomfort be their own. That is psychological maturity. That is spiritual discipline. That is emotional integrity. People will tell you that you've changed. Let them. That's what boundaries do. They reveal who was only there because you were convenient. And when the convenience ends, so does their interest. But that's not rejection. That's revelation. You're not here to be everyone's safe space while setting yourself on fire. You're here to live in truth. And sometimes truth costs you relationships that were built on your silence. A boundary is not a betrayal, it is a declaration. A declaration that you finally see yourself as worthy of peace, worthy of rest, worthy of respect. And if that makes you too much for people who were never willing to meet you at your depth, so be it. You are not here to be easy to consume. You are here to be impossible to forget. There's a deeply embedded lie that sits beneath the nice girl persona, and it's this, that if you're just kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, people will change. That your goodness will wake them up, that your sacrifice will be noticed, appreciated, and eventually reciprocated. But that's not how human behavior works. That's not how relationships work. In truth, what you tolerate teaches people how to treat you. It becomes a silent agreement, a contract you never signed, but are still held to every single day. And by the time you realize the damage, it's no longer about what they're doing to you. It's about what you've allowed. Let's look at this from a psychological perspective. Human beings are conditioned through consequence. We respond not to what's said, but to what's allowed. So when you let someone lie to you and you stay, when you get disrespected and still engage, when they disappear and you welcome them back with no accountability, what you're really saying is, I'm available no matter how you treat me. And the moment that message is received, the dynamic is set. It doesn't matter how many times you express hurt. It doesn't matter how many chances you give. What matters is that your actions keep rewarding their behavior. And people will always follow the rewards. Now here's where it gets even more dangerous. The nice girl believes that giving more is the solution. That if she just pours a little more of herself into the situation, things will finally click. She will finally be loved the way she deserves. But pouring more into a broken container doesn't fill it. It empties you. It drains your emotional reserves, your mental clarity, and eventually your sense of identity. You begin to confuse loyalty with self-destruction, and in the process, you abandon yourself one decision at a time. Philosophically, this reveals something deeper. You're not just fighting for love, you're fighting to be seen, to be validated, to be chosen, and somewhere along the way, you started believing that your value comes from your ability to endure. But endurance is not love, tolerance is not respect, and being a constant in someone's life does not make you meaningful to them. In fact, the opposite is often true. The more predictable you are in your forgiveness, the more invisible you become in their eyes. You stop being a person, you become a pattern, a fallback, a buffer against their own discomfort. Let's tell the truth. People don't change because you love them harder. They change when their behavior no longer works, when they lose access, when they are forced to confront the consequences of their actions. That's when growth becomes possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. And your job is not to wait around hoping someone will evolve. Your job is to recognize when you've exhausted your role, when you've overextended your grace, when your presence is no longer an act of strength, but of fear. Fear of letting go, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. But what if your fear is the very thing keeping you from power? What if letting go isn't loss, it's liberation? Because here's the truth most people avoid. The longer you stay in a situation where you are not respected, the more you teach yourself that disrespect is acceptable. You don't just lower the standard for them, you lower it for yourself. And the longer you allow that, the more disconnected you become from the woman you were before you learned to settle. This is why it's not enough to demand change from others. You have to demand a standard for yourself. A line in the sand that says, if you cannot meet me with honesty, consistency, and respect, I remove myself, not to punish, but to protect, not to control, but to preserve your dignity. That standard is not cruelty, it's clarity. And clarity is love in its highest form. Because it says, I care about myself too much to participate in my own mistreatment. You cannot teach someone to value you by devaluing yourself in front of them. You cannot inspire respect by rewarding disrespect. You don't create change by tolerating what breaks you. You create change by walking away when the cost becomes your peace. Your boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the path to it, because the right people won't be offended by your standards. They'll rise to meet them, so let them feel your absence. Let them realize what access to you actually meant. Let the silence speak, because sometimes the most powerful move isn't another conversation. It's your absence in spaces where your presence was never honored. There is a moment, often subtle but deeply transformative, when a woman wakes up and realizes that her pain isn't coming from what others are doing to her. It's coming from what she's been doing to herself in order to be accepted. And that's a hard realization, because it removes the illusion of victimhood and places the responsibility squarely in her own hands. It's no longer about them, what they said, how they treated you, what they failed to give. It's about you. The choices you made to stay, the silence you held, the standards you lowered, the moments you felt the red flags in your gut and chose to override them for the sake of being agreeable, being easy to love, being the nice girl. Now this is where psychological maturity begins. It begins when you stop outsourcing your value to the opinions of others and take ownership of your own self-concept. It begins when you understand that people only treat you as poorly as you allow, and that continued mistreatment becomes less about their character and more about your boundaries. And here's where the philosophical shift must occur. You cannot be free while still being dependent on external validation. If your sense of worth rises and falls with someone else's approval, then you're not in a relationship, you're in a performance. And worse, you're the one writing, directing, and acting in a story that leaves you depleted and invisible. The truth is, women who are trained to be nice often internalize the belief that love must be earned, that their value is transactional, that if they just give enough, stay long enough, stay quiet enough, then they'll finally be seen. But being seen through a distorted lens does not give you visibility. It gives you dependency. You end up trapped in a cycle of emotional labor, constantly proving your worth to people who have no intention of recognizing it. And what's tragic is that this cycle feels familiar, even comforting, because it mirrors the early experiences of many women growing up in homes where love was inconsistent, where affection was conditional, where approval had to be chased. So you repeat that pattern in adulthood. You find people who echo that inconsistency. You try to fix what's broken, hoping that this time it will be different. But it's not different. It's just familiar. It feels like home, but it's not safety, it's survival. And the longer you stay in survival mode, the more you disconnect from your intuition. You stop asking, "Is this good for me?" and start asking, "How can I make it work?" That's the wrong question. That question keeps you small, it keeps you spinning, and it keeps you in relationships, jobs, and social dynamics that deplete you. Let me be direct. The need to be liked is the most effective form of self-sabotage. It makes you prioritize short-term approval over long-term alignment. It keeps you agreeable when you should be assertive. It makes you explain your boundaries, your decisions, your worth, when the right people won't need an explanation. They will recognize your energy. They will respect your no. They will meet your standards without manipulation, without pushback, without requiring you to justify your own sanity. This is why healing isn't just about understanding the past. It's about reclaiming authority over the present. It's about recognizing that every time you self-abandon, you reinforce the idea that your needs are negotiable. They are not. Your peace is not negotiable. Your values are not negotiable. Your time, your body, your emotional energy, they are not things to be bartered away for scraps of attention. They are sacred, and when you begin to treat them as such, the entire landscape of your life changes. You start speaking up not because you want to argue, but because you finally recognize that silence is not grace, it's erasure. You stop apologizing for your standards. You stop over-explaining your no. You stop waiting for others to validate the decisions that protect your sanity. And in doing so, you shift from being reactive to proactive, from pleasing to leading, from surviving to living. The nice girl is a mask, a survival tactic, a performance you learned because at some point it was safer to conform than to risk rejection. But you are no longer that girl. You are a woman now, and with that comes a choice, to continue the performance or to step into truth. Truth is uncomfortable, it disrupts, it demands, but it also frees, and you cannot be both free and agreeable. You cannot be both powerful and passive, so make the choice even if it shakes the ground beneath you, because the life you're meant to live is waiting on the other side of your refusal to keep disappearing. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that approval is not love, attention is not commitment, and being chosen is not the same as being valued. That moment is not always loud. It doesn't come with fireworks. Often it comes in the quiet. A random Tuesday standing in the mirror holding a phone you wish would ring. That's when it hits you. You've spent years trying to earn something that should have been given freely. You've confused your worth with how long you're willing to wait, how much you're willing to give, how much nonsense you're willing to tolerate. But here's the truth that most people will never say out loud. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself. Let's look at this through a psychological lens. The compulsion to be chosen is rooted in a deep and often unconscious insecurity, this internalized fear that you're only good enough if someone else confirms it. It's a leftover script from childhood, from culture, from relationships that taught you love was conditional. And so you walk around like an applicant, waiting to be approved, smiling even when it hurts, saying yes when you want to scream no, tolerating behaviors that make you feel small, because deep down you believe that if you just hold on a little longer, they'll finally see your worth. But here's the tragedy. The longer you wait to be chosen, the more you teach yourself that your value depends on someone else's recognition. You build your identity on someone else's opinion. You build your self-esteem on the shaky ground of another person's consistency. And the moment they withdraw, you collapse, not because you're weak, but because you were never grounded in yourself to begin with. That's not love. That's dependency, and it's time to call it what it is. This need to be chosen shows up in subtle ways. It's the hesitation to speak your mind for fear of being too much. It's the urge to text first just to prove you're still important. It's the silent agreement you make when someone treats you like an option and you still make them a priority. Every one of those moments is a self-betrayal, a signal to your subconscious that your peace, your voice, your needs are less important than maintaining connection. That's not feminine grace, that's spiritual starvation. Let's take this deeper. Philosophically, to be chosen means to be passively accepted. To be self-chosen is to become active in your own existence. It means you no longer wait to be picked like a child on the playground. You understand that you are the game, that your life, your time, your energy, these are not things to be granted value by someone else. They already have value. Your job is not to prove that value. Your job is to protect it, to act like it's real, to live like it matters. And when you do that, when you choose yourself without apology, you disrupt the entire system. You stop chasing people who were never meant to lead you. You stop lowering your standards to fit into relationships that cannot hold you. You stop overperforming for people who only show up when it's convenient. You shift from trying to be good enough to recognizing that you've always been enough. You are just trying to convince the wrong audience. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the process. It means you stop shrinking to make others feel secure. It means you stop over-explaining why you deserve better. It means you walk away from anything that makes you question your worth more than it confirms it. Because if someone truly values you, they won't make you beg for the basics: clarity, effort, consistency, and respect. And yes, choosing yourself is lonely at first. It's uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, but loneliness is not the enemy. Settling is. There is nothing lonelier than laying next to someone and still feeling unseen. There is nothing lonelier than silencing yourself just to avoid conflict. That's not companionship, that's imprisonment, and you were not born to be tolerated. You were born to be felt, to be heard, to be honored not just by others, but by yourself first. So if you find yourself sitting in the rubble of yet another one-sided connection, wondering why it keeps happening, pause. Stop asking why they won't choose you. Ask why you keep choosing people who make you forget your power. Because the minute you start choosing yourself, the dynamic changes. You stop begging, you stop proving. You start attracting people who speak your language, who respect your time, who don't flinch when you stand tall. And here's the paradox: when you finally stop chasing love, that's when it finds you, not because you need it, but because you've become whole enough not to. The world doesn't need another nice girl begging to be seen. It needs women who are willing to walk away, even from people they love, if it means choosing their peace.